Master.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Steve and then the rabbi. So have a wonderful study, everyone. I'm going to go and celebrate a little bit.
Celebrate your mom's
Birthday,
birthday.
Mom.
So thank you. I'll see everyone later.
Okay. I just wanted to welcome everyone to Torah study and just kind of want to get an idea as to where everyone's from. So if we could all not necessarily introduce ourselves, but basically tell us where you all came from originally. So we want to start with Arlene first.
Okay, now.
New York.
New York.
South Carolina.
Okay. Nan?
New York. Well, Sun City from Scottsdale, but originally from Long Island, New York.
Okay. Irwin?
You know where. Kansas City, Mo.
KCMO. Got it. Ken?
Philadelphia, and then San Diego for 26 years.
Oh my. Okay. Reva?
Hartford, and then DC for 30 years.
Great. And Miss Marcia?
New York, Connecticut for about 3-4 years, Boston for 24, and San Diego for 13.
Okay. Rabbi Kaplan?
I'm from Manhattan, from New York City, but I look at myself as an honorary Jamaican.
Ah. Okay. And Babette?
Manhattan, New York City.
Ooh, of course. Yes. Pam?
Dave and I are from Connecticut.
Okay.
14 years.
Yep.
Ray, where are you from?
I left New York at the age of 2. Grew up in Detroit.
Yeah, put some on there.
Minneapolis.
Put like 3.
San Francisco. Chicago for 40 years. And here I am, past 10.
Very good. Very good. And let's see here.
I'm from the great state of Florida.
All right. And B or Steve? He's muted. Well, let's move on. Rabbi, I'll let you take it over.
Steve, thank you very much.
Wait,
I'm mute. I was on mute.
You missed a few.
I know, Al. I was trying to get things to move in here.
Okay.
I was on mute. Let me get back again.
Okay.
I was born on Long Island, New York, and then moved to DC, and then been in Maryland for about 50 years before moving out here 2 years ago.
Okay.
I'm from the Panama Canal in Panama.
Oh my.
I was there for 30 years.
My goodness. Anyone else I missed?
You.
Me. Well, originally from Oklahoma City, then Kansas City, essentially, then here.
Ruth and Ken, I think you missed too.
No, you got me.
Got you? Okay.
You got me.
I'm from the New York area and now live in San Diego, so I'm a guest with you today.
Good.
Hey,
Good.
Oh, and Susie.
Susie?
I'm from Miami, Florida.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Very
Same.
But
nice.
I've been here since 40 years.
Wow. Very
And,
nice.
and Bob?
My hometown was Arkansas City, Kansas. I lived in Kansas City and Chicago and Norfolk, Virginia, and Providence, Rhode Island.
What was the last one?
Providence, Rhode Island.
Oh.
He was a Navy guy.
Uh-huh.
All right, let us start.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome to everybody. Before we get into this week's Parsha Ve'et Hanan, which, as you see, begins on page 107, and it begins from the 3rd chapter, in the middle of the 3rd chapter of Deuteronomy. I just want to say a few words about biblical translations and volumes and things like that. So you may have seen this week we were sending out something offering to buy a prayer book, which the CCR Press was offering at 25% off. So this is the Mishkan Tefillah, which is the official Reformed prayer book for Shabbat and weekdays. And that's a book that you may want at some point to have. Another book, obviously, is a Bible. Now, there's different Bibles, obviously, but I'm going to divide them just into two types for the sake of convenience. One is a 5-volume combined book, which is a Torah with commentary. There's many of them. They only do the 5 books of Moses because they're primarily worried about what you read in synagogue. It also comes with Haftorahs, which is the prophetic reading connected to the every week's Torah. In contrast to that, you could get a complete Tanakh, the whole Hebrew Bible, there's one produced by Oxford University Press. That is the it's called the I don't have it. Oh, here it is. The Jewish Study Bible, it's called. And that has the Jewish Publication Society's new translation and a brief commentary. It covers all 24 or 36 books of the Bible, depending on how you count. Why do I mention this now? Because in this week's Parsha, Harvey Fields does not talk about, in either of his questions, about what would be perceived by many people, most people, the most important part of this week's portion. And so it'd be nice if everybody had some sort of a Torah, Tanakh, that we could move off of Harvey Fields and also look at other things. But anyway, let us start on page 107. I think most of you probably know what I'm talking about already, what he does not address. But let's start with the Targum. Now, again, he summarizes in one paragraph on 107 the whole Parsha. Then he goes into a little more detail in the Targum, and that's what we're going to read today. Okay? So bottom of page 107, left-hand column, who'd like to start?
I'll start.
Who's
I'll
that?
start. Marcia.
Okay. Thank you, Marcia, and good morning to you.
Morning. Moses continues his last speeches to the Israelites while they are camped in a valley near Beth Peor on the east side of the Jordan River. He tells of pleading with God to allow him to enter the land of Israel and of his disappointment at being refused. God instructs Moses to view the land from Pisgah, a high place on the east side of the Jordan River, and to advise Joshua about conquering the land. Moses tells the Israelites that God has given them laws and commandments by which to live when they enter the land of Israel. They are to observe them faithfully and to teach them to their children. That will prove that they are a wise and discerning people, a great nation. He reminds the people of the time they stood with him at Mount Horeb, Sinai. The mountain was ablaze with flames to the very skies, dark with the densest clouds. And God commanded you to observe the 10 Commandments and avoid making or worshiping idols. Moses warns them that failure to observe God's commandments will result in their being driven from their land and scattered among the nations. If they search for God with their hearts and souls, God will not fail them or forsake the covenant made with their ancestors. Moses speaks of the unique relationship between God and the Jewish people. God spoke to them out of the fire at Mount Horeb, liberated them from bondage, and gave them the land of Israel. Know therefore this day, and keep in mind that Adonai alone is God in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other. Observe God's laws and commandments that you may long remain in the land that Adonai your God is giving you for all time.
Okay, thank you, Marcia. Stop. Who'd like to summarize what the Torah said so far? Okay, Steve.
Basically, it's the Shema and the V'ahavta.
Ah, there you go. Okay. So, in the Siddur that I just mentioned, there are prayers that go way back to the Bible, and these are two of the primary ones, the Shema and the V'ahavta. There's also prayers that were written, in the Talmudic period, in the Middle Ages, and even in modern times. So, but these are the most ancient, and this is what we're talking about. This is in the book of Deuteronomy, so it's structured as one of Moses' final speeches to the Israelites, right? Moses is reaching what age?
120.
And at 120, according to Jewish tradition, that's your max. So at 120, you're expected to pass away. And that's based on Moses. Now, he's also passing away because he upset God, and God said, you're not going into the land. So there's a punishment there as well. But on the other hand, he's seen as a pretty good guy on the whole, a very good guy, and God is very pleased with him. And one of the rewards for living a good life is supposedly long life. Now, we know one of the reasons religion is so puzzling, which is a good thing and a bad thing, is that we all know, very, very good people or very, very good children who died, right, in horrible ways. And we all know, very vicious people who lived on and on in very luxurious circumstances and seemed not only did they not have any external problems, but they didn't seem to be bothered by their consciences at all. And then they died surrounded by, beautiful curtains and with 14 nurses. And so how do you reconcile that? Well, don't expect me to reconcile that for you this morning. but I'm just pointing out the seemingly difficult nature of understanding life, because life doesn't seem to be fair, and we want it to be fair, and yet it's not fair. And then, so religion can help us to, address these issues, not necessarily get answers, but they can give us a structure for discussion of some of these inconsistencies in what we'd like to believe is the rules of life. Okay, so we have here the V'ahavta and the Shema. Anybody else want to say anything about what we read that might give a little more details? I'm getting feedback from somebody. No, can you hear that feedback?
Yep.
What is that from? All right. Well, mute yourself when you're not talking. Okay. Who'd like to read number 3 and 4 on page 108 on the left?
Arlene.
Okay. Go ahead, Arlene.
Moses continues by declaring, Moses sets aside 3 cities, Ezer, Ramoth, and Golan, as refuge places where those who may have committed unintentional homicide may flee for justice.
Just to interrupt here briefly, this is a fascinating concept. Somebody who accidentally kills somebody can run to these cities of refuge. Sort of like Portland, Oregon is for us.
Or San Francisco.
Or San Francisco, right? Do something bad in Arizona, go up to Oregon. You'll be okay. But seriously, there's it's a concept here Something, oops. There's a lot of feedback from somebody. Where is that coming from?
Can you mute us all?
I think it's coming out of Erwin.
Erwin, okay. Erwin, could you mute, please? Thank you.
Okay, let's see if that's better. Something accidental happens. There's like a car crash. It's not necessarily your fault. The other person dies. The family wants revenge, right? So in the ancient times and in some Middle Eastern societies, the clans would get revenge. So it wasn't, the accident wasn't your fault, but you're the sole surviving person. So the clan of the guy who died wants to kill you because their grandfather's dead. You should be dead too. So it may not be thoughtful justice, but it's, their idea of getting their fair share. So according to this, you can flee to one of these cities, and these are cities of refuge where nobody can hurt you. Okay. Number 4, Arlene.
Moses continues by declaring that God made a covenant with us at Horeb, out of the fire. He then repeats God's words to the people, commandments. I, Adonai, am your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other God besides me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image. You shall not swear falsely by the name of Adonai. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet. Recalling the revelation at Mount Horeb, Moses reminds the people of their fear of the fire and their request that he receive 10 commandments for them. He agreed and warned them to follow God's commandments. He told them, do not turn aside to the right or to the left. Follow only the path that God has given you. Moses then instructs them, hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. You shall love God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Take to heart these commandments, impress them upon your children. Recite them when you are at home and when you are away. Bind them between your eyes. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house. To parents, he adds, when your child asks, what is the meaning of these laws and commandments? Explain, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and God freed us, that we might be given the land promised to our ancestors. We are to observe these commandments for our survival.
Very good. I mean, can you come up with, oh boy, can you come up with a portion that is more basic than this? I mean, almost everything we read seems to be, material that we pray every week. And, and why were these specific themes chosen? That's another question. But you can see how important this parsha is. What's the name of this parsha?
Hanan.
Right. Now, if I'd asked most of you before this morning's Torah report study, what is the most important parsha in the whole Torah? Would anyone have said Ve'et Hanan?
Yep, I would have.
And why would you have said that, Bernie? Because you're just a learned Torah scholar?
Oh, because that was my bar mitzvah portion.
And who's going to be reading Torah this Friday night?
Me.
And then who's going to be reading Torah every Friday night from now on?
Andre.
Well, I tried. You see, guys, I tried to trick Bernie into agreeing to something in front of all these witnesses. but you have to get up pretty early to outmaneuver him. So tomorrow morning, I'm going to try to get up earlier. But it's and you knew as a bar mitzvah student that was a very important parsha.
Nope.
No.
I didn't discover this until a dozen years ago.
Oh, you thought your parsha was just normal.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
My grandfather chose it for me. It wasn't the one that I should have had, but he decided that was the one I should have.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So it didn't correspond to the week.
No, I should have been bar mitzvah about 2 weeks earlier.
Oh, but it did correspond to the week that you read.
Yeah, I read it this was an Orthodox shul. What do you expect?
Okay. So now there's no rule that you have to get bar mitzvah exactly at your 13th birthday. We have one woman here this morning who waited, not through any fault of her own, a lot longer than her 13th birthday. And who's that?
It's Ray.
Ray, that's right. And Ray waited not for her 13th or 14th or 15th birthday, but how
for her 100th.
How old are you going to be when you have your bat mitzvah?
So I am. So I am.
Okay.
It's amazing.
And she's now rescheduled her bat mitzvah. You remember it was going to be March, about 10 days after we closed down because of coronavirus. And she had 90-something relatives planning to come. And so, first she had to try to reconceptualize it, and then they eventually postponed it completely. Well, it's now being rescheduled for the last Friday night in August. And so it'll be at a regularly scheduled Friday night service. And like Bernie's going to read this week, Ray's going to read her Parsha. We're going to have her read the Parsha that was originally scheduled in March, because we're not an Orthodox synagogue. And she's going to give a sermon and a speech, and so you're all invited to that. So we're looking forward to that. A simple. And B. Eisenberg is also rescheduled hers, I think, for sometime in October. Okay, so this is the basic Parsha. I'm going to skip number 5 because it kind of moves on to a different topic, an important topic, but a different one. And then you see we have Fields, as is customary, has two discussion topics. And neither of them talk about anything about the Ten Commandments, but they do. The first one does talk about the Shema. And so that's what we're going to look at. And so it's on page 109. Can we decipher the meaning of the Shema? So just from the question, you get a certain sense of what Fields is worried about. And what is that, Marcia? You have to unmute.
I would imagine that people will go astray and not follow the laws of the commandments.
All right. But when Fields asks a question, can we decipher the meaning of the Shema?
Oh, okay.
What is implicit in that question? Babette? You have to unmute.
Oh,
I actually see now. Okay.
oh, you want me to read?
No, I want you to tell me, what does it mean when he says the question? Can we decipher the meaning of the Shema? There's a certain implication there.
There is one God.
One God. Yeah, I just realized what you were getting at. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Are you ready, Babette, to read?
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
Page 109, left column.
Okay, of the 4,875 verses in the Torah, one stands out as the code of faith for Jews. Since the time of the temple in Jerusalem, the word Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Hear, Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one, have been recited twice daily by pious Jews. They are among the first words taught to a young child and the last words recited at the time of death. Jewish martyrs have proudly pronounced them against forces of tyranny, and through the centuries, they have constituted the most universally known Hebrew phrase in Jewish tradition.
Okay, can everyone say it together with me? Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Shema
Yisrael, Adonai
Adonai Eloheinu,
Adonai
Adonai Echad.
Very good. And you can all remember that without having a book to read from?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay. And how many times a day are you supposed to recite this?
Twice.
Okay. That was twice. Once in the
Morning,
and once in the
evening before you go to bed.
okay. And there's a whole ceremony that's called Shema al Hamitah, the Shema, reading the Shema on the bed, which you're supposed to recite right before you go to sleep. Also, if you think you're about to
die,
yep, then you're supposed to recite it. But I told the story already when I got in a car crash. It happened so quickly, the whole thing was over before I even knew what happened. So I had no time to even think about reciting the Shema. So you don't always have that opportunity. So this Shema is in this week's portion, correct?
Yes.
And now we know we've taken it out of this week's portion and we've made it a declaration of faith. We've made it a prayer. We've made it the most famous Hebrew words. But what does it mean in its original context? What does it mean in the Bible where it first appears, before it became a prayer? And that's the question we're looking at today. And remember, Judaism is better at asking good questions than in providing definitive answers. So
It's a declaration of monotheism.
okay, maybe, and maybe not. Okay, we're going to look first at Joseph Hertz. You see the little picture of him. Hertz was one of the earliest graduates of the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, which is now conservative. But this before it was conservative, it was still Orthodox. And he was the chief rabbi of South Africa and then the chief rabbi of the British Empire when there was a British Empire. And he was very knowledgeable about the modern scholarship, but he rejected it. So he wrote the first one-volume commentary on the 5 books of Moses to be used in synagogues. And so many of you probably used it at one point or another because originally every synagogue had it because it was the only one available. And he would spend a lot of time quoting biblical scholars out of context and then saying, they're wrong and I'm right, or they actually agree with me. And so, and he's very different from today where the Orthodox simply ignore scholarship. They don't have anything to do with it. So it was a very different approach. Okay. Who'd like to read in evaluating?
I could read.
Who's that?
Riva.
Okay. Go, Riva, and then Pam can read in the future.
In evaluating the words of the Shema, Rabbi Joseph Hertz, once the chief rabbi of the British Empire, writes, throughout the entire realm of literature, there is probably no utterance to be found that can be compared in its intellectual and spiritual force or in the influence it exerted upon the whole thinking and feeling of civilized humanity than the 6 words that become the battle cry of the Jewish people for more than 25 centuries. Rabbi,
right. Stop there. Does Hertz say, does Fields quote Hertz as saying anything of particular importance? Pam?
What was the question again?
Well, what does Hertz say? I mean, why does Fields quote him?
Says no compared to into. Well, it says it's the battle cry.
All right. So he doesn't say anything too exciting. He just says it's important. 6 words, very important.
Okay.
And that's it. Okay. Now we're moving over to Reform Rabbi Gunther Plaut. He's the one that wrote the Reform 5 books of Moses. He was actually German and came over as a young man with 5 or 6 other German rabbinical students in the late 1930s, temporarily to Cincinnati until the situation there calmed down. It didn't calm down, it got worse. So he stayed, became a Reform rabbi from Cincinnati, and became a very distinguished Reform rabbi in Minnesota and then Toronto.
And he also thought it was a big deal, the Shema.
Okay, and that's all he's going to say as well. It's a precious gem, a diamond set, and a crown of faith. All right. Okay, who'd like to continue reading? Riva.
Rabbi Gunther Plaut, author of the Torah commentary, characterizes the Shema as a precious gem, a diamond set into a crown of faith and proven true and enduring in human history. Despite these testimonials to the importance of the Shema, commentators of Torah raise questions about its meaning, and as with other portions of the Torah, they differ in their interpretations. Rabbi Pinchas ben Chama claims that the Israelites first said the Shema as they were standing at Sinai. The early rabbis teach us that it is an affirmation of the Jewish people's partnership with God. Other rabbis argue that the phrase Adonai, our God, means God is our source. In other words, human beings derive from God and are made in the image of God.
Okay, now this comes from Deuteronomy Rabbah, which is a midrash. And midrashic collections were written by the rabbis or the sages sometime between 200 and 500 CE. So we're talking about a book that was written 1500 to 1800 years ago. So it's relatively recent, and Pinchas ben Chama is a sage. And where does he say the Shema was first came to public awareness?
Sinai.
Okay, then, thank you. So it's a natural thing to try to, the revelation, the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai is a big, important event. So it would be natural to lump everything together and say the Israelites said the Shema for the first time when they were standing at Sinai. And what's the book by the feminist Jewish thinker Judith Plasko is Standing Again at Sinai. And so she says you have to stand again because you have to figure out a way to increase the egalitarianism that is important to us that wasn't really thought about the first time that we stood at Sinai. So we have to stand again at Sinai and, and rework things a little bit. Okay, so Pinchas ben Chama says that that the Shema was first cited at Sinai, and then it gives you a couple of other interpretations. What are meant by some of these words? Okay, Riva, continue. We're now moving into Rashi. Rashi
Can I ask one question?
Sure, let me just finish. Rashi's a medieval commentator. He's considered the most important, most basic medieval commentator. Okay.
Why do they say, it always bothers me when they say human beings derive from God and are made in the image of God. What do they mean when they say we're made in the image of God?
Oh, well, good. Well, this comes from the very first portion, the very beginning, not the very beginning, but almost beginning of the book of Genesis, where God says, I'm going to make human being and I'm going to make human being in the image of God. So that's where it comes from, right? It comes from the Torah. So what it means is another question. Does it mean that we look like God? Does it mean that we have something?
That's right.
Now, when we studied Kabbalah, I don't think you did that course.
No.
But one of the Kabbalists said it means that we at birth are given something divine. So we have a bit of the image of God inside us, and that is what could be called the soul. And then when we die, that soul, which is both divine and eternal, goes back to God. So that's one interpretation. Is that the most obvious interpretation? No. When I hear in the image of God, if I'm going to make a statue to put in our biblical garden in the image of Steve Heckler, I'm going to think it's going to look like Steve, right? It's going to be a big 6-foot statue with, with Steve's face on it, right? And his whatever his clothes are, and if it's a good statue maker, it'll look like Steve, and we'll go out there and say it looks just like him. It's in the image of Steve, right? If we make a statue of Miriam in the image of Miriam, we expect it to look like Miriam. But so if you're asking me for answers, Miriam, you've come to the wrong.
No, I know
place.
that. I just always wondered about it, because they do say God has no form, and they're talking about that God has no form.
But when we come around in the Torah to the Genesis again, which is not that, maybe in about 2 months. If you remind me, we'll try. I don't want to promise. When you don't want to promise something, you can say in Hebrew or Aramaic, Beli neder. Beli means without, and a neder is a vow. Like from the prayers that we do on Yom Kippur, what is the famous service on Yom Kippur? You have to unmute, Dave.
Was it Discord?
All my vows shall be forgiven.
Yes. What is the Hebrew for the prayer? The whole service?
I'm trying to think.
Yeshiva boy's having a blank moment here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Said that, Steve.
There you go.
So kol nidre and beli neder. Neder is from the same root as nidre. Nidre is Aramaic. So beli neder means without promising.
Okay.
So if Miriam says to me, do you promise we'll study this topic in 2 months? I'll say, absolutely, Miriam, beli neder.
Okay.
So that means yes, but maybe not.
Yes, I understand.
Okay. So Miriam's asking a very good question. So, and just to mention one more thing about this, if she was a professional biblical commentator, this is exactly what she would do. She would pick on certain words and she'd say, what does that mean? Just like she did. The only difference is, as a biblical commentator, she would then have to come up with the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Riva, you can go down to Rashi.
Okay. Rashi offers a different approach. Living in 11th century France in a world of conflicting faiths, he hopes that in time human thought will evolve to the point where all human beings embrace one notion of God and achieve peace. For him, the words, "Hear, O Israel, Adonai, our God, Adonai is one," translate into, "Hear, O Israel, Adonai, whom we recognize as our God, will one day be accepted by all people as one, and their belief in one God will unite us as one human family."
Very, very friendly and optimistic. Fields is very gentle, but the atmosphere in 11th century France was not so friendly. Okay, keep going, Riva.
In this view, Rashi reflects the perspective of the Aleinu prayer recited at the conclusion of the Jewish worship services.
Which everyone's familiar with, correct? Okay, keep going.
In the words of Deuteronomy 4:39, the Eleno declares, "Know therefore this day and keep in mind that Adonai alone is God in heaven, above and on earth below. There is no other." Eleno then continues with the hope that all evil will be ended, that the world will be perfected under God's rule, and that all human beings will, God is one. In Gates of Prayer, the New Union Prayer Book, a American rabbi, a more modern version of Eleno mirrors Rashi's interpretation. Eternal God, we face the morrow with hope, made stronger by the vision of your kingdom, a world where poverty and war are banished, where injustice and hate are gone. Teach us more and more to share the pain of others, to heed your call for justice, to pursue the blessings of peace. Help us, O God, to gain victory over evil, to bring nearer the day when all the world shall be one.
Okay. So there's so who can explain what we've just read? Ken, you want to give it a stab?
Okay, I unmuted. Following along with this, it seems like it's trying to form just one belief in one God, period. Now, the problem with that is that there's other religions out there. How do you work with that? I mean, how do they all fit in? They don't.
Right. Rashi lived at a time before there was the concept of religious pluralism. So we accept religious pluralism. He did not. Fields doesn't want to emphasize that. You know, he wants to make it sound nice.
Okay.
Why didn't God do something about this? If he's so powerful.
Well, religion, remember, is for people, and civilizations are different, and so everybody does what they want. You know, it's God certainly doesn't control religions. But I guess how Fields is understanding it is that it would be nice if everyone accepts the one God and can use that as a way to build peace and harmony and, understanding of other groups. I don't know if that's what Rashi originally meant, but it's a nice way to think about it. Ken, further comment?
No, it's just very interesting because I've been out of this for too many years.
Riva, comment?
Just a very small one. We're hearing Adonai and Adonai. Why are there two pronunciations of that?
Oh, because some people are from New York and some people are not.
Good point.
There's different. There are different pronunciations, and of course, people from Kansas City. Is Erwin still with us?
I don't know.
I think we lost him.
Kansas City is Adonai.
Kansas City is Adonai. Okay, and but so there's regional and country differences, of course. You know, if we had an Israeli, you would hear a different accent. Probably what you're asking is the difference between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic accent. So in Eastern Europe, there was a certain way of pronouncing it, Baruch. I can't, Asa Adonai, you know, it was a very Eastern European style. And then at some point, the modern Israeli style took over, and that's, it's a t instead of a s. And in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox use a Yiddish inflected Hebrew, and the other Israelis call them vuz-vuzim, a vuz-vuz, because they do a lot of vuz, you know, whereas in Hebrew, modern Hebrew, it would be a v instead of v. And so that Pam or Dave had their hand up, I believe.
Yeah, I had a question. You know, with Rashi being in 11th century France, was he concerned that the Catholic Church and the concept of the Holy Trinity was competing with the idea of one God?
Yes, absolutely. Now that was not restricted to the 11th century, but Rashi was in a period of rising hostility. He was living in in Troyes, Troyes, which was a smaller city in the Rhineland, in the French part near Germany, and the only legal minority were Jews. So Muslims weren't allowed. Witches were burned. Cathars, which was a heresy, were burned. The only non-Catholics allowed to live there were Jews, and that was, they were tolerated, and there were special taxes, and and all the Catholic clergy. Some of them were friendlier than others. So yes, so there was a lot of religious concern, and and as a result, both sides had to pretend that the religions were more different than they were. And as we studied in Kabbalah, the idea that there may be more than one aspect of God is pretty standard for Jewish mysticism. Maybe it's 10 and not 3, but the idea that God can kind of be split isn't completely foreign to Judaism. But you wouldn't want to say that in the debates. Now, Rashi's time, there were no debates, but within 50 years after Rashi's death, there were groups of church that insisted certain rabbis debate them. And this was, there was a famous disputation in Paris in 1240, and another one shortly thereafter in Barcelona. And so the rabbis had to be very careful because they couldn't lose, but they couldn't win. So it was a very uncomfortable situation, yes. Other comments? Pam and Dave, your hand is still up. And that worked really well. I saw that hand. Susie or Ruth, any comments? No? Okay. Bob or Steve or Nan? Or Roz or Miriam?
Bob has
I
a
have
question.
a comment more than a question, but except for the Middle Eastern religions, and China, Japan type thing, they have a number of gods, but most of the major religions have one God, which is not in conflict with what we're talking about. They may have a different way of worshiping, but still it's one God.
Well, like what religions are you talking about?
Well, I think Muhammad had just one God, as I recall.
Right.
And of course, the Christian religion is just one, or Catholicism, or whatever you want to look at it. I'm trying to think of other non-Eastern religions. I'm not all that familiar with them. But it seems like the concept of just one God isn't totally Christian Judeo.
Mm-hmm. So therefore, who said?
I said, did I read somewhere where there was a God of, some people believed in a good God and an evil God?
Yes, Zoroastrian and other things. And Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote when bad things happen to bad people. Kushner basically said that how can his son die of this terrible disease if God is all good? And Kushner says, yes, God is all good, but God is not all powerful. And therefore, there's a lot of stuff that happens that God has no control over. And these random acts of bad things happen to good people, and God has no control over it. The problem with that is it's not based on a lot of historical precedents in Judaism, where, certainly someone like Rashi would have said, no, God, everything that happens in the world has to be, traced back to God. Arlene or Bernie?
I've been puzzled for a long time by the first commandment. Anochi Adonai Elohecha. I am Adonai, your God.
Right.
to me implies that that's a recognition that there are other gods in competition.
Right. Very good. Very good. And you want me to answer that now?
Yeah, why not?
The short answer is that my theory is that, monotheism took maybe 1,000 years to develop among the Israelites. And at the beginning, when that was written and other things were written, what they were basically saying is they were either monolatry or henotheists. But there's slight differences between these two approaches, which I can't tell you what they are right this second. But basically, they both believe that our God is one God, and our God is the most important God, and perhaps our God is the only God you really need to worry about. But there are other gods.
Wow.
So I think that when these things were written, like what you're saying, the Israelites were saying, our God is the important God. Or, the other gods are of little consequence. But they weren't denying that there were other gods. And then later, eventually, hundreds and hundreds of years later, eventually monotheism developed, where there's one God and only one God in the world, and that's it. And there's no other, it's a unity. And then there was, of course, those who couldn't deal with that. And so there was in Judaism other philosophies, and particularly from mysticism, where they kind of figured out theories that would allow them to explore other possibilities without saying that they were other possibilities. Does that answer your question, Bernie?
Kind of.
Kind of. I thought it's a pretty good answer.
Yeah, it was. It was a good answer.
All right, you want to follow it up with a comment? No.
Good.
Okay. Anyway, there's two hands up, but I can't see who they are.
Marcia.
Marcia, okay. Marcia, go ahead.
So, but because you started and I had raised my hand. So what I was going to say was, when this was written originally, there was idolatry. There were multiple gods being worshipped. There were clay gods that were being brought around from household to household as they traveled. And this was saying, never mind, there is one God. So basically, I was doing a layperson's version of what you just said. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any other hands? Marcia, put down your hand and see if it goes away. Arlene or Bernie?
Sorry, repeat, please.
Your hand is up. Did you want to say something?
No, how do I take it down?
Raise hand is up,
and take it
Rabbi.
down the way you put it up.
If you click
Raise hand is up.
if you click the screen, and then they'll
Raise
say
hand,
more,
yeah.
and then you can unraise your hand. Ray.
I've been fascinated by this history of religious ideas, Mircea Eliade. It explains how religion begins, with prehistoric men even. There was an awe and a fear. How do you explain thunder? How do you explain rain when you need it? Or sun when it is so hot? And so there began simple prayers because of the fear and the awe. And from that, each evolution, which would take hundreds and thousands of years, this went on for a long, long time. It kept growing and taking in other things. The Hindus have many gods, but their stories about good and bad, and many of them end up in triumvirates. What did the Romans and the Greeks do? They had Zeus and a goddess, and a child God from them, and there was kind of a triad. What I'm saying is that as humanity became more intelligent, they took from the past, added to the present, and even our Judaism has remnants of the past. Our high holidays are made at the same time in past religions. Very startling discovery on my part in this book. And it goes on and on. There's 2 volumes. I've never read the second volume. I keep going back to it to see how ours took on from other religions. But we got a basic feeling of the oneness. Here it is, 2020, and the scientists are giving us more and more reasons to see that this is indeed one place. I don't care whether it's just this planet or the moon, the sun, Jupiter. We are one system always. I really believe in the oneness of God. But God wants us to earn the lion lying down with the lamb. And we humans are not we're the ones that have to work at it. I think there may come a time when the lion and the lamb will lie beside each other, but not unless humans learn to give and take better. And here we are today talking about Tikkun Olam. It is our duty to help make the world better in our lifetime around us individually. If that idea is also in Christianity, and it begins to take in other philosophical thoughts and feelings. And I think scientists are helping us to understand this is one world. It's not going to happen in 100 years or 500 years, but I think that gradually we will become one world, and there will be a concept of one God. So help me, I just came to that conclusion this morning.
So you like Rashi's idea?
I do.
Let's turn from Rashi's idea, which is perhaps more emotional and hopeful and futuristic, to a more philosophic approach, which is, of course, Maimonides. But is Babette still there? I think she... Bet. All right, who would like to read on page 110 on the left? Maimonides, for Maimonides.
I'll read.
Here's Babette.
I'll do it. Okay.
Okay, B can do it, and then Babette next. Okay, hi, B.
Hi. For Maimonides, the Shema is not a statement of hope that all human beings will eventually agree that God is one, but a theological declaration that the cause of all existence is one. In his 13 Principles of Faith, Maimonides declares that God's unity is eternal and unique, that God creates all that is and continues to create all that will be, and that God has no body or form. In other writings, here it is, excuse me. Got turned off, I'm sorry. In other writings, he holds that God's power may not be compared to any other power known to human beings. God is not subject to physical limitations or definitions. God's power is endless. The Shema, says Maimonides, affirms the unity of all that exists and will exist.
No, this is Steve. We're in a Torah class. She called me back there.
It is the primary cause uniting the countless stars of the cosmos, the green globe of Earth, and the complex web of life, and yesterday, today, and tomorrow of humanity. In the declaration of the Shema, Jews acknowledge that God is not mortal, not limited to human frailties, and not a symbol reducible to stone, wood, or artistic images. God, Maimonides argues, is the one power that creates all of this, all that is.
And you know that what do we not draw in our synagogues or elsewhere? Pictures of who?
God.
Right. Okay, because once you draw a picture of God, then it tends to, give you the idea that that's God. And so, okay, so what do you think of Maimonides?
I think very wise.
I like that.
Okay. So he's trying to philosophize it. He's saying God is not something you can put any sort of limit on. And this is the point of the Shema. When you say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, God is transcendent. God is beyond physical description. Okay, we're moving on to Nachmanides. Nachmanides was a 13th century mystic in Spain, in Barcelona. And then he was involved in that disputation, and he had to leave Barcelona, and I think he settled in Israel. Okay, Babette, your turn. You have to unmute.
Sorry. Nachmanides sees in the words of the Shema a very personal statement by Moses. He points out that in most other cases where Moses uses the word "Hear, Israel," he follows them with Adonai, your God, not with Adonai, our God. Why, asked Nachmanides, does Moses in this particular situation choose to say our God? Nachmanides speculates that Moses is concerned with appearances. God has liberated the people from slavery. He provided for their needs in the desert and has given them the 10 Commandments. Now, in reminding the people of all God has done, Moses does not want to exclude himself. In declaring God's unity with words of the Shema, he makes it clear that he is including himself as a witness to God's goodness and power.
One more paragraph.
Nachmanides bases his interpretation on the actual Torah text. In the Torah text, the last letter of Ayin and the first word of the Shema and the last letter Dalit has the last words are enlarged. Combined, the letters spell the word ed, meaning witness. In reciting the Shema, Jews bear witness to God's unity and power.
Okay, you've heard this before. If you look at the Hebrew text there in your book, right above this last paragraph, you see the Shema Yisrael there, and you'll notice that the ayin in the first word at the end of the first word and the dalet at the end of the last word are a little larger than the other letters. And that's the way it appears in the Torah, and this has been pointed out. Now, how did this come about? It may have been an accident originally, but once these two letters got enlarged, scribes had to copy it the way that the previous texts were. Could it have been an original feature? I guess, but we own the oldest scrolls we have, or the oldest texts we have, are the Dead Sea Scrolls, which only go back 2,000 years. So we don't have texts showing the original Torah, which would have been hundreds of years earlier than that. If they were to find a scroll in Israel somewhere in some cave that was 2,500 years ago, that would be a huge discovery, but that's very unlikely. So we don't know what the original text looked like, but I think it's more likely than not that those two letters originally were the same size as the other letters, and some scribe made a mistake, and then it got carried on, and then the Nachmanides said, well, why are they large? It can't be accidental. And then he saw that the ayin and the daled made aid, witness. So we're witnesses. What do you think of Nachmanides? Anyone? Comments? Bernie or B?
I think he's just grasping at straws to have something to say.
So you're not impressed.
I'm not impressed either.
Much to do about nothing.
It's a more technical approach, and many of the medieval biblical commentators do this. They take small aspects of the text and they try to make homiletical points about those issues.
But they all come to a point where they say God is one. They still do that.
Yeah, well, they have. I mean, that not saying that would defeat the whole purpose of
but that's what they all do eventually.
Okay, we have 2 paragraphs on the Chatam Sofer, a Hungarian rabbi, very, very extreme Orthodox, who'd like to read the next 2 paragraphs.
I will.
Okay.
Nachmanides bases his interpretation on the actual Torah text. In the Torah text, the last letter, ayin, of the first word of the Shema, and we read that already.
Next paragraph.
Rabbi Abraham Samuel Benjamin Sofer, a 19th century Hungarian interpreter, also calls attention to the way in which the Shema is worded. The verse says, Sofer, which could have been written, Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, and Moses, and is one. Instead, the word Adonai appears twice. Why? Sofer speculates that Moses meant to teach that all human experiences come from God. What we know is good and evil, our moments of joy and sadness, all our successes and disappointments, and our good or bad fortune, all are derived from God. At times, Sofer explains there is a tendency to believe, as did many other early religious traditions, that there are gods for good and gods for evil. Contradicting this assumption, Moses tells the people, Hear, O Israel, Adonai our God provides all the goodness we experience, and Adonai our God is the author of the harsh judgments we endure. Adonai is one.
All right. Comments? Who wanted to speak? B?
No, it's
Riva.
Riva.
I want to go back to page 110 near the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
Where the paragraph that begins with Nachmanides.
Yeah.
I thought there was something interesting there. The last sentence is, in reciting the Shema, we bear witness of God's unity and power. And so I think we're talking maybe in some ways about 2 things. But what God is, or how we define him, or how we think of him, and his impact. And so I just thought that was an interesting point, because it seems to me we're talking sort of really multidimensionally.
Okay. So Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai is our God. Adonai Echad, God is one.
Eloheinu, isn't that God too?
Eloheinu is our God, yeah.
So Adonai or Eloheinu?
Yeah.
Any other?
Yeah, there's others. There's Shaddai, El Shaddai. There's several other names for God, yes. So what is Sofer trying to say?
This is Ray. I have my hand up.
Okay, hi, Ray.
When they were just a year out of the Exodus, the Hebrews built an idol while Moses was up in the hills getting the 10 Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
Their punishment was to be in the desert for 40 years. Moses didn't do anything so terrible in our eyes, yet he could not go into Canaan, into Israel. God is a careful God, and in these instances meets punishment. And at the high holidays, we pray for a good year and hope that we will be forgiven for our ways. If we've hurt someone, we should fix it up in some way. So what I am saying is that we humans are the ones who have to cooperate with God and help cover the things that are wrong. And because of our nature, this is not going to happen quickly. But I do think that in time, we are wiser. Don't tell me that we haven't made great strides in medicine and in discoveries and in understanding. And there are more people doing better across the world than in any period of humans. We are gradually changing. And I know that my father used to say that our brains have tremendous capability. We don't use anywhere near the full capacity. And as time grows, I think that there will be more happening to better the world.
Okay,
You
so
know what I mean? And there is a oneness about everything. Everything is dependent upon something else. Nothing is alone here.
now the oneness that Ray's mentioning is very important. The fact that two different words are used for God is also significant. And Shlomo Riskin, or Stephen Riskin, who was a rabbi in New York, originally Lincoln Square Synagogue, has the next 3 paragraphs, and I want to get to that because I think it's quite significant. Who would like to read, starting from contemporary commentator Rabbi Shlomo Riskin? Okay. Please mute yourself if you're not talking.
Contemporary commentator Rabbi Shlomo Riskin holds a view close to Sofer's, carefully analyzing the Hebrew words Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. He notes that 2 words are used for God. The first is Adonai, the second is Eloheinu. Early Jewish tradition, says Riskin, associates God's qualities of mercy and love with the word Adonai, and God's qualities of judgment with Elohim.
Okay, so this is very important. So different words for God have different attributes. Okay, keep going, Bernie.
Riskin maintains that when Moses first spoke the words of the Shema, he meant to clarify a significant problem faced by the Israelites and by all people as well. The problem of understanding God's unity and the way God works in our lives and in the universe. When things go smoothly, Riskin writes, when one feels a warm glow of love, success, and good health, one naturally attributes this to the good, compassionate nature of God. Adonai. But when sudden tragedy strikes, the death of a loved one, national calamity, and earthquake, one feels the awesome and inexplicable power of God, Elohim. The Holy Zohar teaches that
this is from the Kabbalah. It's the 13th century commentary on the Bible, which is mystical.
The Holy Zohar teaches that this seeming split in God's character is a result of our imperfect vision. If we could see more clearly, we'd understand that everything God does is done for the good of humanity. Perhaps we can't always perceive it, but how can a finite creature be expected to fathom the infinite will? The message of the Shema, Riskin adds, is that if our eyes and ears were truly opened, we would comprehend that everything in the world, both the things we think of as being clearly good and those other things that frighten us with their might, emerges from a compassionate and loving God. In other words, Adonai is one. Within Jewish tradition, Riskin concludes, we teach that just as we praise God for the good, so must we praise God for the evil. If we truly understand what the Zohar teaches, then we will understand that there is no evil.
Well, responses, Ken.
That's asking a lot. I mean, I'm trying to put myself back in that time and understand what he's conveying to us. That there is no evil. That's a hard concept.
That everything that happens, good and bad, comes from God and therefore is good. But I think we're more, we can more understand what Rabbi Harold Kushner says when he says there's evil and it can't come from God because it's bad. So there has to be another force that is not subject to God's authority. But, you see the problem in monotheism, that it solves certain issues, but it creates others. And Riskin is trying to reconcile that, but he doesn't convince me at all. I want to move on because our time is short, and I want to get to Leo Back, which starts at the very bottom of 111 and top 12. He was a German Reform rabbi, a leader of the German Jewish community during the Holocaust. Afterwards, he moved to England, I believe. Can we truly believe? Who'd like to read? Bottom of 111 and then continue on 112.
I'll
Who's
read
that?
it.
Pam.
Okay, Pam.
Pam wants to read.
Okay. Can we truly believe, however, that there is no evil and that this is the message of the Shema? Rabbi Leo Bach, leader of German Jewry during the Holocaust years, probes this significant question. The Jewish spirit has always sought to grasp the oneness of all reality. All reality, whether unfolding itself in one sphere or in the other, expresses one great unity to the Jewish spirit. Only the one God exists, and therefore there is only one order, no matter how manifold its appearances, how contrary its representations. Within everything, therefore, there exists an inner reality, unique, one, concealed, unfathomable, infinite, eternal. That is its foundation. Everything proceeds from the one God. Everything returns to the one God. Bach's view seems to differ from Riskin's. It is not that there is no evil or suffering, quite the contrary. The suffering of human beings and the evil they experience is real and from God. Suffering becomes a test of human power to overcome afflictions, says Bach. He concludes, the wisdom of Judaism, its very history so devised it, is that it seeks life as a task imposed upon human beings by God. Suffering is part of that task. Every creative individual experiences it. Through suffering, human beings experience those conflicts that give tragic significance to their will to fulfillment. In other words, not only is evil real, but in the battle against its human beings tests their strength. In reciting the Shema, Jews set their energies toward resolving conflicts and transforming themselves into unity and harmony. Keep going.
No, let's stop there. Bob, you like Riskin better or you like Bach better?
I actually like Bach. When you think about the evil in the world, and that God does that in order to make you stronger. It's like when the Jewish people were in Egypt and they were slaves the whole time. God allowed that to happen, but they grew from that. I think
It doesn't explain the Holocaust, you know?
I don't like the Holocaust, but don't you think that it gave you something to fight for?
It
Yes,
gave a
but
big,
the whole
a big
idea
disconnect.
that the whole idea of it is, I'd rather not. You know, I'd rather figure out another way to grow emotionally than to have all these bad things that I have to overcome or not overcome. It seems. I mean, I don't want to have to deal with evil and see that as a challenge. You know, I want to have a nice, quiet life in Sun City, Arizona, and you know, where the worst problem I have is that I got the wrong, you know, type of shampoo at Fry's.
I just think that we're simplistic. Life is not that way.
Yeah, but Bach says what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right.
Yes.
So Pam, do you like that?
The Holocaust didn't make us stronger. It gave us a big disconnect from our past. Most of us don't know our relatives.
So
But there is more understanding about the Holocaust amongst other people, in a way.
Who's talking?
I couldn't hear.
Okay, identify yourself before you talk so we know who's talking. So
Miriam.
Miriam, do you like Riskin better or Bach better? Or neither?
Neither one.
Neither one. All right, let's try. We have two more commentators. I don't think we're going to, unfortunately, get through both of them, but let's take a look at Mordechai Kaplan in the 2 or 3 paragraphs subsequent, bottom of 112 on the left. Who would like to read?
I will.
I think we've got Nan.
Okay. While Beck does not deny the reality of evil, Solution argues that God, who is all-powerful and all-knowing, actually causes civil evil so that human beings will be tested to triumph over it. Modern Jewish philosopher disagrees. He points out that if we say that God is responsible for evil, then we must accept that God brought on all the atrocities of history, and that God is responsible for earthquakes, famine, floods, and other natural catastrophes. Such a conclusion, argues Kaplan, makes God into an evil monster. Instead, Kaplan believes that we can resolve this difficult problem by assuming that God's omnipotence or powerfulness is not an actuality realized fact at any point of time, but a potential fact. If we take into considerations that God is eternal, then it is possible to understand that the evil that now mars the cosmos will ultimately be eliminated by human beings who, as God's creation, are seeking to reduce the amount of evil in the world. That's a really strong statement, I think.
Yeah.
Evil, therefore, is not, as Beck says, deliberately and knowingly placed by God in our lives or in the universe as a test for human beings, but rather it represents an obstacle to the good that God is seeking to achieve. Should I go on?
Yeah, one more paragraph.
Kaplan clarifies his point by answering the question, why did God make polio? He writes, God did not make polio. God is always helping us human beings to make this a better world. But the world cannot at once become the kind of world God would like it to be. When human beings make use of the intelligence God gives them, they learn more and more of the laws of health, by which all kinds of illness can be prevented or cured. In this way, concludes Kaplan, human beings help God eliminate the evil that now mars the cosmos. For Kaplan, the Shema is an expression of the special partnership between God and the Jewish people in the battle against suffering and in the triumph of good over evil.
Okay. Comments? Pam or Dave? You have to unmute.
First, your relative.
Say
Cap-
again?
Is Kaplan a relative?
I was going to ask the same thing.
No.
But I do like his concept of a special partnership between God and the Jewish people. I think that's the battle against suffering and Tikkun Olam. I like that concept.
Okay. It certainly avoids saying anything that seems rather repugnant.
Yeah.
Bob or Steve, comment? You have to unmute. Bob, do you want to add to what you said before in your favoring of Bach over Riskin now that we have Kaplan in the mix?
Well, I do like what Kaplan has to say. Unfortunately, in my tradition of way I was raised, it was more the other direction, back. So, but I can see where both, a blend of both actually makes more sense.
A blend of who and who?
Beck
and Kaplan.
Beck and Kaplan.
Okay.
Because there's some points of Beck that I definitely agree with, and Kaplan doesn't necessarily totally disagree with him in those aspects. Even though we have challenges in our life, they're not necessarily always evil. They may appear to be that way initially, but once it's come to its conclusion, it's a life learning experience, and it's good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Nan, comment? You agree with Bob?
I like. Go ahead. Who's talking? Do you want me to
Nan
talk?
first. Nan.
I sort of like Kaplan's view in that where he says that, we have a partnership. But it's interesting, especially now with the pandemic going on. It's like the humans, there's been a failure someplace to get us to this point that, maybe we ought to take this a little more seriously and do a little more of what Kaplan says.
I go along this time with Kaplan. He makes me more, it's to me more positive.
Okay.
Because, yeah.
That's Babette talking?
No, that was Miriam.
Miriam, okay. Marcia?
I think I'm unmuted now, and I'm going to lower my hand so I don't stick out there. You're talking about outside forces like illness. What about evil people? I mean, there are evil people, and they're created by the same God that created good people. And so the kind of bad things that are created by bad people, that's something that I don't know how do you deal with that when you're talking about God's omnipotence and power, etc.
Well, that's an easier question to actually answer because, I mean, the Judaism's very clear. I mean, Judaism doesn't have clear views on a lot of things, but on this it does. We're each given the choice of doing good or doing bad, and we choose what we do. Frequently, though, it's not like I sit down and say, I'm going to be evil. You do a little bad thing and then another little bad thing, and then it kind of brings you to a place. And likewise for good. So there's choice. Okay, Bernie.
It seems to me that we're hampered by the fact that we don't have a devil.
We do have a devil.
Well, wouldn't the use of the devil concept kind of fit right in here?
Oh, it could. I mean, but Satan is a Hebrew word. It's in the book of Job. It's in other places in the Torah and the Tanakh. The Southern Baptists stole it directly from us. Now, Lucifer, the name Satan, Satan, is Jewish. The name Lucifer comes from Christian sources. But the idea of a devil and the name Satan is totally Jewish. Bernie, you weren't you before the coronavirus? Didn't you sit next to Arlene? Was on one side, and on the other side there was a gentleman with the red tail sitting next near you. You didn't see him.
Nope, he was maybe on my shoulder.
Which shoulder, left or right?
Don't remember. I can't remember what I had for breakfast. How am I going to remember that?
One or two more final comments, Babette.
Well, as I referenced earlier, I cannot see any justification from anybody the good that came out of the Holocaust. You know, I mean, the extent to which evil can exist, and that if it's God's will to punish 6 million people and wipe out generations, I don't see the good that can ever come out of that.
Does Leo Back say that good comes out of that?
I think what he is saying that the battle against human beings is a test of their strength. I don't know that we are stronger now because our whole generations were wiped out. That not only just ordinary people, but the height of scholarship and music and medicine and philosophy.
All right, but
was wiped out. It doesn't come from that.
But from Leo Back's point of view, who went through all of that personally, what is he supposed to say? Is he supposed to come out and move to London and say what happened is an unmitigated catastrophe and we should just all be sad? I mean, I think he feels it's more useful to say something that, you know, what good can come out of it, right? I mean, can you see it from Back's point of view?
I don't think good comes out of that. And quite frankly, in part of our world today, with the rise of anti-Semitism worldwide, I don't think so.
But if Back had not come up with some positive spin at all, he'd be a very depressing person.
Rabbi, now there are some religions that do support us because of the Holocaust.
Okay.
That might be one thing.
But Babette's saying it's very minimal, and the evil and the damage is 150 times more than any minor positives. But from Leo Back's point of view, he went to Theresienstadt. He was kind of lucky. But, you know, he still went through the entire Holocaust. He did have an exit visa to England, but he stayed in Germany because he was a rabbi and he felt that they needed leadership. And, you know, he went through the whole thing. And, you know, so afterwards, I think he's trying to say something, you know, that would not say it was good or that it, but he's trying to come up with something inspirational to say not all hope is lost, that even from the very worst things, something, I feel as a rabbi the same pressure, right? Like if things are bad, like with coronavirus, if I give a sermon week after week saying, oh, we're stuck in our houses and we're going to catch this terrible disease and the whole world is in the process of falling apart and the stock market's going to crash, and it doesn't help. So there's a certain pressure, I think, on rabbis to come up with something inspirational, no matter how bad. But I agree with Babette in that, the Holocaust is just something totally horrible that happened, and there's very little, there's no way to really spin it in a positive way.
Well,
and I don't think that Back is really trying to do that. I think he's just saying, here we are now in whatever 1948, and we have to try to look and figure out what we can do to challenge ourselves to move on. And I don't know,
we did have
Miriam and Babette, and then one or two more comments, and then we have to end.
We did have survivors, remember, who did talk about it and tell us about the atrocities. So it did help in that way that they told the world about these atrocities so that we know, and we hope it will never happen again.
Well, we're talking about.
I agree with you, but I'm just trying to find a reason.
Okay, Babette, and then one or two final comments. Babette.
So one of the examples, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Viktor Frankl's book, which they recommend to people who, you should learn and maybe feel better of where you are now than where it was. But I don't think that's the good that can come out of the Holocaust. I don't see it that way.
Okay, but you can understand why Leo Back felt a need to say what he said.
I understand that, and people should learn, but learning from it doesn't make it a worthwhile experience of what can happen.
But there are other experiences like floods and earthquakes.
Sure. We could take perhaps a different example. Instead of the Holocaust, we could say, something like a hurricane or something. But there's no question that in this world, bad things can happen. And some of those are just quote unquote acts of God, and others can come directly from other human beings. Okay, any final comments? We are a little bit over our time, so I apologize. And thank you very much. I'll see some of you tomorrow for the basic Hebrew prayers, and others of you I'll see Friday night. And with that, I say, Kol Tuv, have a good week, and I'll turn it over to Steve to say goodbye.
Take care, everyone. Be safe, and we'll see you Friday night, if not tomorrow.
Thank you for a really
Bye.
enjoyable
Thank
class.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Take care.
And